Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Free Birth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
I'm thrilled to be bringing you a conversation I had with the wise and inspiring Qiddist Ashé. Qiddist is a radical birth keeper in the Chicago area who shares her journey of transitioning from the heroic doula to now the authentic midwife in her community. We talk about how to practice a full body yes, the no diet, and her epic work in the world. All right, Qiddist, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Excited to chat with you.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, where you live, and what this journey of birth work, has looked like.
Yeah, so I live in Chicago currently, but was born and grew up in Portland, Oregon. So that's really home for me. And I've always been very drawn to birth. I was in the room when my brother was born when I was 4.
Aww.
And it was a hospital birth. My mom is from Ethiopia and comes from a lineage of medicine women and midwives. Came to this country and there was a lot of fear, and it was really indicative of like how fast we can forget our innate power. Because midwifery and free birth was obviously her lineage, and yet, being here, just so much fear around birth. And she, has a very strong intuition and was really like pushing off the doctors and doing it, as best as she could, without a lot of medical intervention, despite being in the hospital. But I remember so clearly being 4 and having other women, I think her friends in the room, who were really nervous and kind of jittery. And I was just like, going around saying, don't worry, it's normal.
Shut up.
Don't worry, it's normal. And they're like, who is this? Who is this child?
Oh my God.
The only way I can explain it is that is my grandmother, my great grandma, is just like in me.
So sweet.
Yeah. So I always loved birth. It always felt like, yep, this is what we do. And, as I got older into my teens, I started really digging into just the racial disparities that I saw in my own community, and how Black women, Black families were getting treated just by the medical system and what that meant for families. And so I always thought, I was going to study policy. Well, I did study policy. I always thought that one day, like when I was retired, I would be like a, really traditional midwife and be in the countryside, and it would be great. But my partner at the time, when I was in college, was like, okay, you're watching birth videos every night till 3 a.m. You better just do it now because you can't wait. And I was like, you're right.
Or retire really young.
That's really the move. Yes, which is really what I did. So I took a doula training. And
how old are you at this point?
I was 19.
Okay.
I believe.
Nice.
18, 19. And
still in Oregon, or have you come to Chicago?
That was in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And, enjoyed the training a lot. And I did I was working with different communities. So I went to a training that was, one of like big organizations fairly, predominantly white in its organizational leadership and the people attending. And then I also had people in my community in Portland who were Black women who were in midwifery or who were doing birth work. And so I kind of simultaneously got a couple different lenses, which were similar in some ways, but I was really struck by this idea of like scope of practice. And when I went to, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, it was a DONA training.
Oh yeah, that's the one I did.
Okay.
Regrettably.
Right. When I went to my DONA training, there was so much around like scope of practice.
Yeah.
And particularly like there was a panel and all these people were like, well, I would never cook for a client because that's
gosh.
Like I would never get in a car with my client because that's a liability. And I would never, and I'm like, well, then what do you do?
Yeah. You just stand there.
You just stand there.
Well, we were just recently talking about this in the school around scope of practice, that's basically a what's the word? Like a scapegoat term for ways in which we disconnect from women.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like ways in which we don't show up, ways in which we don't provide actual human to human care.
And it's fear-based. It's totally fear-based.
Of course.
And I was kind of joking with friends because at least within the Black community, it's like if you're even a doula, like even a pretty mainstream doula, you're like a community health worker. So you're like going to doctor visits and, cooking food and driving people. It's like, what do you mean scope of practice?
Oh,
right?
So you're saying that you noticed a distinction in the predominantly white, like DONA kind of mainstream communities around these ways of disconnection, essentially, versus in the Black community, in the birth world, that were like, that's absurd.
Right. Even a step before this like idea of scope of practice beyond the medical system, like, whoa, even, backing it up, just like even within what was considered pretty mainstream, I noticed this difference. And so I was like, okay, what do I do with that? How do I make this work for me? And started attending births. And I think where it became seductive, this like medical birth model, and the work that I really had to do was around my own ego and identity around like being responsible and being a helper. Like that was very much part of my identity from childhood. Like I am responsible. I know things. I will help. Right. That was like my survival piece. And so I think this idea around being really knowledgeable about all the medical interventions. And, I shadowed at a hospital because in Portland, they have doulas on staff at some of the hospitals, which is pretty unusual, right? And so it was like working in this on-call system at a hospital where I was like, OBs would like talk to the doulas and be like, well, what about this? And what about that? And it became sort of seductive, but there was always a piece that was like, this doesn't quite feel right. But I did that for a number of years until I started not being able to cope with what I was seeing. And I think that breaking point happened, unfortunately for me, it had to happen over and over again before it was like, that's the last straw.
Same.
I think it started when I saw my first unconsented episiotomy. And I called my mentor and was like, what just happened?
But also, there's no such thing as a consenting episiotomy. Let me just say that real quick.
Yeah. But an episiotomy that also had no words, like nothing at all was said. And the way that it got framed by my mentor was just, I remember the conversation being around like, well, if she doesn't seem traumatized, like don't put your trauma on her. Right. And that just, I was like, what the fuck? Like, what do you mean? And so I ended up just holding so much.
This is rape culture.
It's exactly. And I think it was, I don't know if it was you or a guest that you had who said, it really is. It's like knowing that your friend is dating someone who is abusive. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, it's exactly what it's like. And going back there and going back there and going back there. So, I was like, well, okay, I'm really going to focus on home births. And in Oregon, there's like a midwife on every corner. And, home birth is much more normalized than it is. Home birth with midwives is much more normalized than it is here in Chicago. And so I attended a lot of home births. Some were lovely. Some were just as messed up as the hospital births. But saw a couple births where the midwife either didn't make it at all or, made it at the very last minute. And it was like, well, what was the point again? And I think that's when I really was like, what is this thing that could happen if no one was here? Like without any disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And
so how many years have gone by now at this point in the story of you attending births?
About 2, 3.
Okay.
So not too long.
But you hit it like hard. Like it sounds like you
I was doing
really going
a lot of births. Yeah. While having a full-time job. And then eventually I left that to just do births. Yeah, I was hard in elementary school. So there were days where I would teach all day, go to a birth all night, and then turn around and go back and teach 6-year-olds all day. And I was like, okay, actually don't think that's going to work. Totally nuts. It's totally nuts. So, and that was part of the culture too. And I don't know for you, but it was like, how many births can you do? Like I take 4 or 5 births a month, and it didn't feel right. And I never subscribed to what I saw as sort of the typical model of like, you do 2 prenatals, you go to the birth, you do 1 postpartum. I was like, that's bullshit. Like I can't do that. It just felt so, the professionalism and this wall, right, was just so strong. And so I was seeing people throughout their whole pregnancy and just doing way more than I could sustain.
Yeah.
I think it got to the point. So fast forward maybe another couple years. I hadn't aligned yet with free birth. I hadn't really seen free birth talked about yet. But was like, yeah, it would be nice if the midwife just didn't show. Like I'd always kind of cross my fingers, like maybe just happen. And I was still attending hospital births, and I would just come back sobbing, or there was always a point during a birth where I would go to the bathroom. I'd leave the hospital room, go to the bathroom, and just want to scream. And I would come home, and my partner, my wife now, would be like, yeah, you did that at the last birth. Right? Like I needed it to be reflected. And it's like, you're right. Like it's no more. And
God,
so,
but getting outside of that hero,
yeah.
I remember, and so many doulas are still at this place when I talk to them, but I really remember for a couple of years kind of still falling for or being committed to but someone should be with them. At least I can hold their story and help them process. And at least I could, maybe stop something, at least I know the system. And just this real heroic fake guardian that was completely ineffective, basically, sadly.
Yeah, it's totally ineffective. And, especially because the reason that I got into this work was especially to serve particularly Black women and families in my community. There was this, I think I had talked to another doula about I think I'm at least just going to brand myself as a home birth doula. Right. And the conversation was like, so are you going to abandon? What about all the Black people in hospitals who are being abused by the medical system? There was just so much wrapped up in that.
Totally. But then become a lawyer. I mean, a doula is not
bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah. It's not the role for that specific, very real, very horrific problem. A doula is it's nothing. It's a little bit of education, but does it change anything? It's ineffective.
And it felt like lying. It felt like at some point I was lying to people.
Yeah.
Because even when I tried that thing for a while where it's like, okay, well, we're just going to, labor at home until the baby's coming out, right? That whole thing. And I was still seeing people show up to the hospital at 10 centimeters and have cesareans and have their babies ripped from them, have traumatic postpartum. So what was the point of that, right?
And shaving off 20% of the abuse to just have the other 80. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it really felt like, people were coming to me, and I was getting slowly more and more bold about like, this is what you're going to experience. This is what you're going to expect. But it wasn't my sharing that wasn't meaning that they weren't going to experience it. Right.
Especially being like, I'll still go with you. Like that was my big turning point where I so relate to your story and being like, okay, I'm just going to tell the truth and I'm just going to, say what I see. But what was it flagging to the client to be like, but I'll still totally be there. And when I started saying, and I won't be there because of this abuse, that was when I saw like a whole next level of impact.
Yeah. And it was when I was in this transitional time, started to hear about free birth. And I was in a Facebook group of it was like Black families, unassisted birth or something like that. And seed got planted. I started telling clients, because I worked with people for so long, I would say like, I'm just letting you know you're midway through your pregnancy and you're planning a hospital birth. I'm letting you know that I will support you through this pregnancy, but I have aligned with birthing outside the system now. And this is why. And while I will maintain my commitment that I made to you, I'm not doing this anymore. And a lot of my clients switched to free birthing. And I was like, what? And I didn't expect that. I was so fearful. People were like, that sounds amazing. I was like, it does? Right? People that I never would have thought, that would have resonated. But it was like, you could see them just breathe for the first time. Like, I didn't know that was possible. I could actually say no to all of this that's harming me. And so when I realized that, I was like, oh, it is possible. It is possible.
And you're literally providing another path, which, the classic quote, if you don't know your options, you don't have any. And this is an example of that. These women don't have options. And then you come along and say, well, I'm actually setting a boundary. And here's the path that I now support. You just gifted this woman options that she didn't see before. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it was a beautiful realization and process to be with people as we were making that journey. The part where it got sticky, and this is where I think, I had heard stories about people aligning with free birth, and then it was and then you ride off into the free birth sunset, and it's great.
What story is that?
It just seemed like I align with free birth and then it will be easeful. And what I found to be really telling and the next piece of my work was that just because someone says they want a free birth doesn't mean that you're necessarily aligned to be working with them. And so I think what has been so huge to my work is this idea of being able to co-regulate with moms, and how do you get in alignment with where they are? How do you be on that same wavelength? And what that looked like was I was working with clients who'd be like, yeah, I want a free birth, but I'm not telling my mom and I live in my mother's house, right? Or yeah, I want
red flag.
Red flag. Or yeah, I want a free birth, but no one in my family is supportive, and I'm just gonna be I'm just gonna leave that where it is, right? And then it would be messy. And I had moments where there were times where because I wasn't co-regulated, because I wasn't in full trust of them, of the birthing woman, I wasn't fully trusting of them because I could feel them wavering in their own boundaries, that I expressed, curiosity or concern, and didn't feel like it was going to impact them negatively, potentially, if they weren't already in their full sovereignty. As opposed to when I'm working someone who has a really aligned with free birth, it's we're both in our power, and then it's magic, right? So I think that piece around just the importance of co-regulating and being in alignment in that way is so important. And so what that's meant for me in terms of work that's in my integrity is, because I really thought what does this look like, especially as I'm thinking about addressing, racial disparities in the way that, Black women and families are treated in the medical system and in the birth industry. And so I started doing the more educational, like coaching pieces to folks, but was only showing up and attending births with people who I was like, yes, like I trust.
Yeah, that's legit.
Right? And it seems normal, like, yeah, duh, that's what you do. But it's so not the doula model, right? It's not what we're
and you've been a hero your whole life. So you're to set boundaries, which are obviously in integrity, but that's a huge, huge, huge lifelong like learning curve of how to be in boundaries, in integrity, and show up completely. Like that's a complicated puzzle to figure out, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And this idea that I never bought into, but was so pervasive around like neutrality, I'm using air quotes, right? Like doesn't exist, but within the doula culture of like the doula for everyone or whatever.
Well, it's literally like show up neutral, have no bias, and save everyone.
Yep.
Like at the same time somehow. And you're powerless, but also take all of our workshops and all of our trainings, like all at the same time.
Pretty much.
Bonkers.
So untangling that, and I'm grateful that, I haven't been doing this for that. It's not like I was doing it for 10 years before I got to this point. Like it took a few years to get there, but I'm grateful for, having community and folks to look to who are doing this work and for the podcast and, all these other resources to get me there a little bit sooner.
Seriously. Yeah.
But the interesting thing too is that as I was working with folks in pregnancy, what really came through was pregnancy is a really hard time to make a complete like belief system shift. Possible, like people do it every day and it's incredible, but it's such a vulnerable and open time to go from I've been planning, hospital birth is my only option my whole life, or even, medicalized birth in any way. And then to make that shift is so challenging. And so that's when I was like, okay, I also think we need to go back further before pregnancy, before birth.
And in those shifts, like when I see women make those shifts in pregnancy, it's almost always because they had to get really, really uncomfortable first, for the shift, and really that's true across the board with shifts. Like shifts typically happen out of getting really uncomfortable and where it's like, I have to do something different. So you see a lot of women at the end of their pregnancy, getting bullied into a bunch of stuff and then finally being like, fuck it, I'm staying home. But I totally hear you. It's a totally different consciousness and it's so much to untangle. And many pregnant women are just kind of in a state of survival, trying to learn the new language and deal with their pregnancy symptoms alone, right? Like I hear you. You got to start way before, ideally. It's just going to be easier if you've started before.
I was like, how could this process be a little more easeful? And then I thought about, at the time I was also doing a lot of work around fertility and reproductive health and did a 2-year clinical herbal program. So I was kind of thinking about these worlds that were merging and was dealing with my own like journey with my own physical and spiritual womb health. And I was like, okay, what if we took this back, before? And then that's when I saw like, how is there a way to get in alignment with our sovereignty and to actually feel what intuition is? Because so many of the people I was working with, in pregnancy would be like, I don't know what my intuition is. Or, we'd even be like doing something like cat-cow, right? Like just like move. And I'd be like, just move your body. And people would be like, what do you mean? And it
so
was
sad.
So heartbreaking. And I was like, oh shit, this goes way deeper.
Okay.
It goes way deeper. It goes back to our menarche, and it goes beyond that, like to childhood, like all the times that we're told to not listen to our bodies and don't cry and you don't know what you're feeling and you can't trust that sense. And so that's sort of where I ended up going while still holding the birth work piece, is like, how can I support people and walk with people as they're doing this work of getting in alignment with their body before we get to the time where we're bringing in a new life.
So what does that mean? It was like through coaching, or what kind of
What does it
Yeah,
look like?
so I offer clinical herbal support and like womb wellness coaching. So that means like I support people in learning how to align their lives to their menstrual cycles. And part of that is a lot of like somatic and embodiment work of just really getting in touch with like where your body is and reclaiming the power to know how to care for your own body. So especially around reproductive and generative health, just all, I mean, even going to like hormonal birth control, right? Like this idea of like, well, the same thing as we do in pregnancy, like, okay, well, this is what I've been given and I will put up with, the abuse and the toll that it takes on me. And, that's how it is. And breaking up with that relationship and actually getting to know our own bodies and how to care for them. So doing a lot of that coaching work one-on-one and in groups and building community around that.
And is this mostly in person in Chicago, or do you do a lot of virtual stuff?
Now I do a lot of virtual stuff, primarily virtual. Yeah, I'd love to go back to sort of more group in-person things. And I do in-person more one-on-one. But yeah, I do a lot of virtual coaching, and I have a group coaching course on lunar living, and that goes into like the herbal care and nutrition and as well as just like the embodiment of like, how do we create a life that's in alignment with our desires, and how do we even know what our desires are? Right? That piece is so huge that I saw coming up in birth too. And I was like, what do you want? What's your dream? And people would be so afraid to even go.
They don't even know how. I mean, so many women would be like, just to not have a C-section. Like so many women that I used to ask this question to would speak in a negative. Yeah. Like, what is your dream? My dream is to not have a C-section. That's not a dream, sweetheart. What is your dream? Yeah. That's not your dream. Yeah, I know. It's a lot of untangling.
And we do that for our lives too, like.
Right. Do it for everything.
Survive. Just survive is where we're at. And so how do we, and for me, the path, like the connection between going from surviving to thriving and being in a state of agency over our lives is this body connection, is this womb intuition, and how do I feel what is true for me? And that takes time and work. Yeah.
Do you want to drop like a quick practice if someone wants to start learning what her full body yes feels like? What could be, does anything come to mind as like just someone listening, like a daily practice that they could start implementing?
Yeah. One of the ones that I really love that's just super simple is having an object or something that represents something that you feel really drawn to. So even if it's an opportunity, like something that feels like a yes, like you want to say yes to it, and placing it in front of you and then like reaching towards it. This is one thing one of my teachers, Jeevan Singh, taught me, like reaching towards it and then feeling in your body, like what does it feel to physically reach towards something that you really want? And like, what is that? Where does that sit in your body? Like, can you like feel into, like, do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your belly? Can you breathe a little more? Right. And then when there's something that you're not so sure about, can you do that same practice and feel what comes up? And for me, this has been something, as someone who grew up with this hero narrative and someone who has, it continues as we do, right, to do work around boundaries, is sometimes it can be hard to feel what that embodied yes and embodied no is if we haven't tapped in or been able to say no before. So having something really physical, and when I'm trying to discern if something is in alignment for me, even if it's like a birth related thing, right? Can I put this in front of me and drop in and feel what arises? And that bringing that connection has been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, my mentor always says, if it's not a full body yes, then it's a no.
I just said that to someone yesterday.
Like, I love that. That's helped me a lot. Yeah. Because that's like totally turns it on its head.
Isn't that a game changer? Yeah.
Because really, we're raised, most of us, to ignore our no and morph into an obligatory yes. So it's like, if someone's like, can you watch my kids? And I don't actually want to. I'm trained to be like, yes, I'll figure it out. Right. Even though that's going to stress me out and that's going to just put me in my hero persona or whatever. And obligation really is, I have come to think that obligation really is the flag that you have stepped out of your boundaries and are now doing something that doesn't feel authentically true for you. And that's really helped me a lot just to catch that. And I'm happy to say I don't do obligation anymore. And it's a real, if I start to feel a sense of obligation around something, it's like an alarm bell is going off in my system now, because that is such a no. If it feels like obligation, then it's definitely a no. But the whole other piece is, are we willing to say no? Right. And that's really, really scary for most of us. Something I like to do with the women I work with who have a really hard time saying no, who have like never said no in their whole lives, is put them on a no diet where they say no. Let's say they have a partner, if the partner's playful and if it's a healthy thing. So she has to come up with 3 things to say no to every day with her partner, with a friend or whoever, and just to play with that and actually like have fun with it and make it big. And no, I'm not going to hand you that pen, just even if it's something silly, but just to feel that and reprogram, your mind that you can say no and you're not going to get yelled at like you probably were as a kid. You're not going to get hit. You're not going to get abandoned. You can say no now. And assuming you have, well relationships in your life now, you won't be punished for having boundaries, which is such a big reframing, because I feel like they have to go together, right? It's like full body yes, figuring out what that looks like, understanding if it's not a full yes, then it's a no. But then are you willing to have a no? Are you willing to say no? And then see really the freedom on the other side of that.
Absolutely. And it's that repatterning and that connection between like being able to speak it and then what does that feel like in the body? I mean, I would have my wife would like practice with because my big thing was always like saying yes to opportunities, like needing to say yes. And she would just practice. She'd be like, but don't you really want to do this thing? And I would just have to be like, no. Like find your no buddy, right? Like find your person to practice your no with. And and then when you get to pregnancy, if you've even done some of that work, and then you get to pregnancy and you're like, nope, actually, I'm not going to listen to that story, right? Nope, actually, I'm not. This is not open for your opinions. Oh, like what a difference,
right? Because it's coming to get you. If you're listening right now and you're pregnant and you don't know how to say no, it's coming to get you, because at some point, people are going to be crossing your boundaries. I mean, they already probably have been your whole life, unfortunately, but pregnancy is a whole nother thing. And then you have a kid outside of your body. So you're super ripe for boundaries to be crossed. I don't mean with your kid. I mean with people around your kid. And at some point, you're going to have to learn how to say no, or you're going to be miserable, which I guess really is where a lot of people are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the gift, right? Wherever it is, whether you're pregnant or not, like I find it especially to be true in pregnancy. Like part of the gift is to make those boundaries come up real strong. And if you can be open to taking that gift, it's like, okay, I need to get in alignment here. What a gift.
Yeah. Mama bear.
For your child. And
so have you attended births outside the system?
Yes, I have been attending births outside the system for a while, but exclusively for the past year and a half or so.
Exclusively. Okay. So you don't attend if there's medical providers.
I'm not. And now, yeah.
Nice. Hey, boundaries.
Impressive.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I have just finished because it was challenging. I made the decision, whether it was, everybody makes different decisions to fulfill what I committed to with clients who I had been working with, for 7 months or whatever, even though I had switched to aligning with free birth. But, I've finally released all of those folks who've had their births within the system. And so now I'm, working with folks outside the system.
And what's that like?
It feels so expansive, and it feels, what I love is that I get to choose who I'm in relationship with. And I because I'm doing fewer births as well, I can be more present and really feel like I get to be in reciprocity when walking with people. Part of what was really challenging for me as a birth worker and this sort of like professionalization of birth work was, by nature of, whether you go to your acupuncturist or whoever, it's more or less a one-sided relationship, right? And that didn't feel right to me in birth because I didn't want to be attending births with people who I didn't have a relationship with. And so in aligning with free birth, it's really allowed me to step into the space of I only support people who are in my community or who are willing to be in community with me. And that feels really nourishing and sustainable. I think my fear, starting as a doula was like, well, how could I be sustainable doing births outside the system?
Totally.
It actually feels incredibly
way more
limitlessly. Yeah.
Because you're in integrity.
Yeah. The abundance that's possible.
Right. And the universe will take care of you when you're in alignment.
Yeah. And just to watch people's, it's beautiful.
So how, just because women ask me this all the time, so I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it. How would you say the majority of the women you serve come to you already wanting you as the non-medical midwife, or are you converting people like they're not sure and you coach them and they choose it, or are the majority of women already clear that they want to birth outside the system? Because where this question's coming from is, we have the school now and so many people who are curious about the school and the line of work that you and I both do. They're like, well, how am I going to find the families? Like, do women really want this? And it's so obvious that they do because it's all I see. But I wonder, if you could speak to that to help assuage that insecurity.
Yeah. And I don't know how helpful it is, but throughout my journey in birth work, it always feels like when I made an internal shift, the universe is like, and just like lined up without me really doing much differently. Like I remember when I switched to being aligned with free birth, I hadn't even changed my website. Like my website still was pretty doula-y. And all of a sudden I was getting messages from people being like, hey, I'm interested in having birth outside the system. And I'm like, what is happening? Like within a month.
That's so cool.
It was amazing. I was like, what's happening?
Well, what's that quote? Energy flows where your attention goes.
Attention goes. Yeah, exactly. So, part of it I think goes, did I really believe it? Once I really believed it, it started to align. Largely the people who seek me out are already aligned with free birth. And I think part of that is just showing up in different communities and virtual spaces and in-person spaces where people know that that's what I do. And so people come to me. And when people come to me who are on the fence, largely they're interested in like childbirth, like radical childbirth education. And I'm like, well, whatever you choose, this is going to be really helpful. And more times often than not, people, through that process are like, oh, that is what I want. Like, I choose freedom. And
right. It's kind of hard once you see it to unsee it.
Exactly. And what's beautiful is, and I'm sure this will shift as I continue to go along in terms of where my zone of desire really is. But, in this phase, like I don't really spend much time converting people. It's people really like people want it. People want it when they see it. And it's given me a lot of ease and peace to be like, here's what I'm offering. Yeah. Take it or leave it. Right. And the people who align will align. And it's so possible. I mean, there's more people who are wanting this than there are people who are supporting it for sure. I know
exactly. Yeah. And it's a real shift. It sounds like that you've made from kind of a spirit of scarcity into abundance, like that shift of the doula role that's like hero-y, but also convincing into like what happens when we don't try to convince anyone of anything. And I feel like then you get into this arena of truly non-hierarchical support where you're already, when you don't have an agenda for someone to be different or a different place than they are, right? Whereas doulas, I think if most of us were honest, we would admit that as doulas, it's largely about subtly or not so subtly trying to convince said person to minimize their abuse, right? So like decline induction, or, we're kind of like the, well, air quotes advocate, but really it's a lot of convincing, it's like going over there all, like you said, all professional. And this is what's going to happen unless you do this, and you need to do this. And then you're going to get the hep lock, but you cannot get the hep lock if you do it. And it's just like this entire, and it's entire agenda, of really trying to convince people, and then trying to convince the doctors not to abuse the women we're with. Right. So I felt it's a lot of attempted convincing. And so I felt a really similar shift in my own spirit, since I started Free Birth Society, of really making this conscious shift of what could it look like to not try to convince anymore, and to just carve out my slice of where I want to hang out, and trust that the women who want to hang out in this arena will come. Yeah. And it feels so different. I don't think anyone needs this. I don't think anyone needs anything I'm doing. I don't think anyone needs me. Which is so different than how I felt as a doula. And like I said, kind of the final point, I guess, is just it's opened up a world of what I would call truly matriarchal sisterhood can even begin to feel like, because I feel it can only exist in a non-hierarchical model, which, otherwise everything we see with medical midwifery and doulaing is still that we know better. We're still there to save. We're still there to hero. So we are a little bit more powerful. And when you tilt that, and it's truly, like an equal playing field, like you said, truly in reciprocity, and everyone kind of in their own power and exalting each other in that, like, it's just a totally different arena. And the women come because women, this is in our souls. This is in our, in our DNA.
Yeah, it's in us. And I remember the first time someone reached out to me and said, I'm going to Free Birth. I don't need you there, but I would love to have you. And it just almost makes me want to cry, because
that's what's up.
That's it. I was like, yes, I will be there. Right.
Yeah. And I do want to mention here, though, for the women listening, that plenty of women along the way, especially in the actual labor or coming, heading up to the labor, they will temporarily sometimes think they need you. And that's okay. Yeah. That's understandable. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to not forget that they don't need you. Right. Like, that's part of our job as the midwife, we're not allowed to say that word, I guess, but as the radical birth keeper, our job is to continue exalting a woman in her power, even when she doesn't feel it, or can't find it, which obviously, if you've ever attended a birth, that's part of the decimation, is we lose that compass throughout the journey. And in those moments, it is very common that a woman would, kind of look to us to give her power away a little bit, or to be reassured in maybe a hierarchical way, right? Like, we're authorities of birth or whatever. But the game is just to not ever take it that way. And no one really, like, people can try to give their power away, but if you don't take it, it falls flat. It doesn't go anywhere. Like, the danger dance is when you take it, and then you're in, a pretty unsustainable, not great arena.
Exactly. When we can reflect the power back, that's our job. That's our role, is to hold that line and reflect that. Mm-hmm.
Well, anything else you want to say? Any words of wisdom to birth workers who were on the path that you were on a couple of years ago? Anything come through to share?
As we talked about a little bit, I would just say that if you feel that pull towards free birth, allow yourself to dream. Allow yourself to dream. Like, in the same way that we asked people in pregnancy to dream, like, dream what you want your life to be. Like, what would your life really look like if you were aligned with free birth in this way? And once we allow ourselves to go there, I really believe it comes into alignment. And there are so many women, there are so many families out there that want this, and that want that sisterhood and that guidance.
And this really blasts through the kind of this idea that, like, home birth is only for the privileged white, people who have money. Like, you don't. Yeah. I mean, I do think that birth keepers should be paid well and in reciprocity and all of that. But this blasts through this like notion, that it's only for the privileged, because it's not true at all. A lot of women I serve are women of color who understand what they're up against in the system and take responsibility for co-creating a situation that feels a lot better for them, because I just detest this notion that free birth is for privileged white women. That's such bullshit. It's not true at all.
And especially to birth workers of color and Black birth workers in particular, for me, it's just like, it's this call of like this ancestral, for all of us, but particularly I think about, the Black, midwives who birthed, everyone, right? And for those, like that traditional spirit holder and birth keeper that is in our bones. And this is a return to that. Like, it is our birthright. It is in our DNA, and it's so healing.
And I guess, some of the critique that I've gotten in this arena is, but it's more dangerous, but, arguably more dangerous for Black birth keepers or Black families, which, I could see that for sure. That makes sense that there could be, for some Black birth workers, that it could be more scrutiny, more, certainly for families, they're under more scrutiny, especially if they're at a lower socioeconomic status, the intersections of all of this. And that's for everyone to kind of evaluate and see what they're up for. So I guess that was something I wanted to ask you, like, how do you navigate the risks?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And when I think about it on families' ends, and because that's often a question I get, particularly from Black families, it's like, but is this putting me at more risk? And maybe, and I see, here in Chicago, people who are choosing hospital birth who decline vaccine, or who do one little thing, right? Don't check the box and get CPS called on them.
Exactly.
And so to not choose free birth from this place of fearing that it's more of a danger, I think is just false, because the danger is, unfortunately, it's present.
And I would kind of offer, like, take responsibility for creating the thing you want to see, and you're going to be taken care of. Like, if you really take responsibility for it, right? Meaning, let's say a family births outside the system, the chances that they're going to transfer in are incredibly low if they're truly transferring in, right? Because we know that shit is super rare. So there's always a dance to be had with the system. But I guess I just mean, like, putting energy towards creating a story that you do want to live is going to have a feedback loop, instead of, I know families who have not wanted to birth in the system and then birthed in the system and tried to navigate the system and were worse off. Like you said, if to try to say no to a couple of things, and you're literally in the arena you don't want to be in, trying to like pave your own path, which isn't going to work because you're in an arena that's already against you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think often, at least the people who I talk to are more, there's more concern, not so much in the actual birth process, but then the things like getting a birth certificate and having to deal with, and the way that people do get treated. And I will say, like, I do often, depending on where people are, see a difference in how folks are treated. But finding your people, and like getting a community and surrounding yourself with people who are in alignment, who can journey everything through it makes a huge difference. And on the birth worker side, I think, we all have to find what feels right for us. And that's another piece that I think is so powerful about free birth, is that it is so expansive, and not everyone has to be attending births, right? Like, so many people are doing virtual coaching and not actually attending births at all, or teaching in this. So there are so many ways to be in integrity, in ways that feel right for your positionality too.
Totally. And be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you just have like a licensed midwife kind of in your arena who will do a postpartum visit or something to keep families? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm thinking about the woman you referenced earlier in the conversation, your mentor, who kind of just like reframed it. Like, if they're not traumatized, then you're not, kind of thing. And I'm just wondering if you had a similar experience as me. Like, I had doula mentors. And then the more I critiqued all of this, it all just kind of came unraveling. And I found myself mentorless after a while when I like went against all this nonsense. So I was kind of wondering what your journey has been like with mentorship in particular. Like, if you found women in this arena to kind of help guide you through, or has it been pretty lonely?
Yeah, I think I didn't really wait for my mentors to ditch me because I knew that would happen. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to peace out now because I could feel that, the alignment wasn't there. And I was like, well, then I'm not going to continue to come here for support. I was really lucky that even before coming to Chicago, that there were a couple of traditional midwives in the Portland area who were really supportive of free birth, and who I could contact and be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And in Chicago, it has been pretty lonely, and it's been more challenging to find community in that way, which is why I'm so grateful for all these virtual spaces to come together. But one of my dreams is to create some in-person community here in the Chicagoland area of birth workers and birthing, women and families who want to align with free birth. So if any of those people are out there.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Ashé Living, ASHE Living. That's my business, or on my website at asheservices.com. And I teach a lot of menstrual reproductive health things and more birth things coming, hopefully doing a BIPOC centered birth worker mentorship next year, which will be really fun. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, it's a treat to have you on, and it's always just so inspiring for me to connect to other women who have come to similar conclusions, that this is all just like these little lights are coming on for all these women around the world. And I'm so proud of you. It takes so much courage to, take the path less walked and to carve it out and serve your community. So thank you.
Such a gift. Thank you for all your work, and for spreading that light.
And that's it for today, my sisters. Check out everything we do, including one-on-one and group coaching. Learn about our private membership, in-person retreats, and more on freebirthsociety.com. Our online courses are on freebirthsocietycourses.com, including our flagship course, The Complete Guide to Free Birth. Don't miss the Radical Birthkeeper School if you're ready to become the authentic midwife that women are searching for. Together we rise, and the revolution starts inside each of us. Our opening song is by Shyla Ray. And now, I'll leave you with our Free Birth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red.
I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back from the stars.